soon as you bring perfectionism into the picture, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute, it starts to distort things and cause unhealthy consequences. What there is a healthy striving for achievement, a healthy striving for excellence. Okay, so you and I are probably in that group, and we are very keen to achieve, to get better over time, to be ambitious. And we know that's actually associated with good mental health. There's no evidence to suggest that that's bad. And what it means is that we're interested in the journey even more so than the sort of the destination. So we're curious to find out. We enjoy learning. We enjoy playing around with different ideas. We enjoy talking to others and shaping our ideas, but in order to make them better. We're not afraid of working hard, but we don't identify just as someone who does good work. We have other identities in our life. Now, perfectionism is really striving for high but very rigid goals, black and white goals, which, when they're not met to the standard to which you've set yourself, you feel that you've failed. So it becomes an all or nothing. I either achieved it or I failed. It's not a discovery. It's that black or white. And then it morphs into, and therefore I am a failure. Therefore I am somehow not good enough. So it becomes personal. So perfectionism is surrounded by lots of habits and behaviours that people use to compare themselves with others, check if they're up to scratch, to check and make sure that things are up to the standard. It starts to take up a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of focus, and it starts to become the person's main source of self-worth. If I achieve to this standard, then I'm okay as a person. Whereas the person who has that healthy striving for excellence is able really to put it down and spend the weekend, if you like, with a colour book, colouring outside of the lines. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to keep achieving in everything. They're happy just to take time out and put energy into the other important domains of their life.
Welcome to Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stoltz, where academic rigour meets real life. I'm Dr. Stephen Stoltz, educator, philosopher and academic at the University of Adelaide. And this podcast series is my quest to help everyday people access research-based ideas that feed curiosity and foster deep thinking. In today's episode, I explore the fascinating and complex world of perfectionism with Professor Tracey Wade from Flinders University. Professor Wade is internationally recognised for her groundbreaking work on perfectionism and its relationship to eating disorders, anxiety and depression. Her research has been published in numerous prestigious journals, and she has developed influential treatment approaches for perfectionism-related conditions. Whether you're someone who struggles with perfectionistic tendencies yourself, know someone who does, or you're just simply curious about perfectionism, then this episode is for you as we explore what perfectionism really means beyond common understandings. And we examine how it develops and manifests in different areas of life, and discuss practical strategies for those caught in its grip. So join me as I bridge the gap between evidence-based research and everyday application. This is Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stoltz.
The real trigger was one of my PhD students who had obsessive-compulsive disorder. And she was very interested in perfectionism for personal reasons, and that's what she did her PhD in. And so we actually tested out an intervention for perfectionism, a cognitive behavioural intervention. And then I can't quite remember how this happened, but I met up with Ros Shafran from the United Kingdom and Sarah Egan, who works in Australia. And they both had interests in perfectionism as well. And so we just started chatting together. Roz had already started to do some work in perfectionism, and we thought that we worked together well, and we would write a book, a self-help book, the CBT, the Overcoming Perfectionism. And so that was many years ago. We met up in Canterbury, of all places, to kickstart that. And from there, we've worked together and still work together, currently have projects together, really trying to, I guess, iron out this cognitive behaviour therapy, test it out in all different ways, both face-to-face, online, with adolescents, with young adults, in therapy, as prevention, all different types of ways to make it as robust as we can. So we've actually got to the point now where we have a website and we try to make freely available all of the resources and materials that we've developed, because we're a great believer in the fact that we've been supported by research money over our careers, and we are really keen. We know that they're evidence-based, we know that they work, so we're very keen for people to be able to use them freely.
We'll definitely list the details in the episode descriptor and on my website as well, definitely. And the book that Tracey is referring to, I've got it here in front of me. It's titled Overcoming Perfectionism. I have the second edition,
Yes.
And there's a subtitled, it is a self-help guide using scientifically supported cognitive behavioural techniques. Again, I'll make sure we put that in the episode descriptor as well. Tell the listeners who are listening who might not know who you are a little bit about yourself, like your background, your area of expertise, or anything that you would like to share.
So I trained initially as a clinical psychologist, and so I went out and I was acting as a clinical psychologist, treating people across different settings in community psychiatry. And then I also ended up in a general hospital treating both inpatient people who were inpatients in psychiatry, there for other health problems, and had an outpatient anxiety disorder and eating disorder clinic. Because what happened at that time was I also went off to the UK to work just before I ended up at the hospital, and I was working at Cambridge University in an eating disorder clinic. So when I came back here and I was working, I did a PhD part-time, and that was after my master's in clinical psychology. And the PhD was actually in eating disorders. And over time, as I was working as an academic, it became clear to me that perfectionism was very much implicated in eating disorders, but also in a whole range of other types of mental health challenges.
See, that interesting, an important segue here is one of the first ever podcasts I did was on burnout. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've actually interviewed Professor Gordon Parker. In fact, that's the next episode. Very impressive individual. And it was interesting that one of the drivers of burnout is perfectionism, which led me to this solo and then, of course, to you. We all need goals. You know, we all need goals. I need them. I think having goals are important. But then when should I be worried, and when should, I guess it goes back to that question, and when this it's a tricky question, I realise. It's not as simple as saying, it's at this point. But at what point would you reach a threshold to say, hang on, there are red flags here, and this is now actually becoming problematic for me? And I guess there'll be a lot of people who'll be listening and will be wondering that themselves.
Yeah. I think one of the things you'll notice, and we find this when we do experiments as well, is that you've tipped over the threshold when you have a success but you brush it off. You don't celebrate it because you think, oh, well, I should have been able to do that anyway, or anyone else could have done it. And then you decide to raise the bar again because you think, well, maybe it was too easy. So you don't take that much pleasure in it. Whereas if you don't reach your goal, and we can call that a failure, but it's just not reaching your goal, you really take it to heart much more than someone who is just interested in attaining excellence. So it ruins your day. So let's use a specific example, and I'll use one that relates to me, which is I submit a lot of papers for publication. And when they get rejected, as some of them do, or they get sent back with lots of helpful comments from reviewers about rewriting them, I might be mildly annoyed. I might think that they haven't got the best judgment, but it doesn't stay with me. Or I might, let's put another option on the table. I might say, oh, well, that is a good point. I could make this better. And then it goes on the pile of things to do and it gets done. But a perfectionist would take that to heart and it would ruin their day. They'd actually have a sense of the bad taste all day, following them, and it wouldn't really matter what else was happening. They'd just keep coming back to this and starting to gnaw on it and thinking about it and wondering if people think or people have discovered that perhaps they're an imposter. They're not as good. They start to get worried about what do other people think of me. Am I as good? So that's when it's how you react to when things go well and when things don't go well. If, you should be able to take pleasure from successes. So when I get something accepted, great, excellent. I tell the team, we put it on the CV, and from time to time I'll pull it out and have a look at it because, I quite like it. And, that's really nice. And when it doesn't get accepted, I know that's life and I need to either do better in the sense of explaining myself better, or I need to find someone who's got better judgment who will publish it. So that I think is an early warning sign when that sort of balance starts to tip over.
Yeah. Now, I got to ask a follow-up question. That is, what is the significance of self-worth and self-identity tied here? Because when I was reading your work and other associated literature on perfectionism, that part really jumped out at me, and I was like going, I wasn't shocked or surprised, but I was trying to understand the significance of that. It's almost like a mortal wound, like I've somehow. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about what that's about and what's the significance of the self-worth identity tied to this?
Yeah. So we talk about the things that impact on how you feel about yourself as a person, which you could call self-worth, or you can also call it identity. So the example I often give to my students is, look, if I have a terrible, terrible argument with my husband versus having a manuscript rejected, which one do you think upsets me more? And they're never quite sure which is the right answer. But
could be both.
But the right answer is when I have a terrible, terrible argument with my husband, because my relationship with him has more impact on my self-worth than getting a paper published. Okay, so we talk about this sort of, if you think of a pie chart and the different domains of life that impact on your self-worth. For most people, they have a variety of things. So when I think, about mine, it is about relationship with partner, with family, my work, pet owner, being a good pet owner, being a good community citizen, and doing my bit. I'm a gardener. I like to be physically fit. All these things make me feel better about myself when they're going well, and when they're going badly, they impact me, but at different levels depending on which is most important. With what happens with the perfectionist is that achievement becomes the really only indicator of this self-worth. The pie chart just becomes 100% consumed by achievement. And it could be achievement across lots of different areas of life, but they have to be, the most interesting person socially. They have to be the best at work. They have to have the wittiest emails. They have to be the one who keeps their house immaculate, or when they have a dinner party, nothing should go wrong. Or if they're a parent, that their children are never the ones that act out in public. So that you can start to get a feel for how encompassing and really what an onerous burden it becomes, because it really starts to it's a contagion through all the domains. It can take over any domain of life. And so but it's all about achievement, that perfect, that all or nothing goal, and that's what makes me feel better. It's not just, I just spend time with the people I like and have a good time, because that's not achievement. It's not just about, I did a good 2 hours in the garden and, it was productive. It would be about, did I achieve, the tasks I set out for myself. So it becomes all about achievement rather than, which, that's fine to be in the mix, but they don't have it leavened, if you like, with just being who I am type goals and just being able to feel that I'm, making a contribution to the world. But it's not about achievement. It's just about doing your best.
Yeah. So sticking with this point of the self, is there much work around understanding how the sense of self, like when I heard you talk and gave that explanation, it sounds very much like we have these different modes of being. We have these different modes of being different selves in different spheres. Yep. And what I seemed to jump out at me a little bit in your explanations is this disproportionate focus on a rigid type orientated goal. I guess I'm trying to understand, is this, where does that come from? Where does, is this a learned behaviour or is this something that's happened through my upbringing, through parents? I know that's a big question, but I guess I'm trying to understand, is this kind of like really a learned behaviour that's become habitual that I'm not aware of, or is it?
It's a bit of a mix. We know you can often, people are born with a bit of a perfectionistic tendency. You can spot those kids because they're the rule followers. They're probably less tolerant of uncertainty. They're not keen on mess, and they don't like being told off, and they're the ones who like to get top of class, and they get really upset when they don't. So you can see that emerging in childhood. And so I guess the take-home message we always make sure people get is just because you're born that way doesn't mean you can't change it or moderate it.
Yeah.
Make it work for you rather than against you.
Yeah.
But sometimes kids are also born into families where that message is emphasised. Certainly not everyone. But some of the people I see clinically can say, well, if it wasn't the top mark, my parents weren't interested. They said it wasn't good enough. I know they wanted the best for me, but they used criticism to activate me, to get me to work harder. So they feel that if they're not the best, they're no good. We also know there's something in the broader environment, because what we've seen happen over the last 25 years is that perfectionism has increased in young people. And the explanations for that are not quite clear, but a few candidates is again just this, the world has become more focused on individual achievement, standing out, and, it's moved away from a community sense of being happy to be part of a community that contributes. It's more focused on individual achievement. And we have that playing out in the US politics, I think, at the moment, that obsession with individual billionaires and politicians and, that greater focus. So it's that probably more of an issue in some cultures than others. So there's something been happening there. I think social media can be good and it can be bad, but the bad bits, I suspect, are about giving impressions that the world works more perfectly than it does. Yeah. So if you've gone for your holiday to Bali, you're not posting photos of you in the first 3 days where you've got your head down a toilet throwing up with the Bali belly, I would imagine. But you're posting the photos that come in the 5 days after that, which is sitting by the pool with the pina colada and lovely sunshine.
Yes.
So everyone's thinking, oh, well, how did they have such a good holiday and I didn't? And we do the same. We know that with young people, when they do selfies, they post themselves, post images of themselves. It might be the 100th picture they take to get the right angle, the right lighting.
And you can edit it. These days you can edit.
Yeah.
Even AI can take over and do all sorts of things now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can't tell. And it's been used even for many years in advertising, the airbrushing, the getting rid of creases, getting rid of hips that are too wide. And I think there was an interesting story about Kate Winslet many years ago where she said they took a third of my body off for the picture on the front of a magazine.
Yes. Yeah.
So that certainly has skewed us towards thinking things can be perfect, given us an unrealistic idea. I think also generally schools have felt under pressure to promote this idea that everyone has to achieve. And I think they're backing off that now. I think we get a lot of schools now contacting and saying it's all gone terribly wrong.
Oh, yeah, particularly 11 and 12, particularly year 12.
That's when and so what we see and what we get called in for is you've got gifted kids at year 8, they're identified as gifted and they're put into special classes and given opportunities. What happens at about year 10 or year 11 is they actually select out of the most ambitious courses and they start to underachieve. And it becomes a really noticeable trend because they've become burnt out from this perpetual trying and competition and I've got to be better than everyone else. They've started to experience mental health problems and they've started to really fear failure and fear not being good enough. So it's all too much and they just start to opt out of achieving. They're no longer enjoying it. It's become punitive because it's become too focused on getting that top mark. So there's a variety of influences and the environment can either reinforce that genetic propensity or it can moderate it. It can work so that people can retain that desire to achieve, but do it in ways that doesn't harm themselves.
Yeah. You see that I might there's a few things there I'm going to come back to, but I want to ask one follow-up question around, it was a bit of a clumsy attempt at my previous question, but I guess I was asking personality types. Are there certain personality types predisposed to perfectionism?
We talk, the personality types that we talk about a lot are people who are harm avoidant, and we talk more about sort of temperament now, but we know that there are people that are just keener on rule following. So it's conscientiousness, if you want the old Eysenck sort of way of looking at things. They're highly conscientious, want to follow the rules, want to do well. But there's also the harm avoidance, which is they don't tolerate uncertainty or anxiety very well, or not, they really just want to get the work, get the top mark and get out of there. They don't want this lovely journey of discovery and learning. They just want to get that top mark so they can get into medicine. It's this sort of very, let's just get there and get on to the next thing type of approach. So it's that type of personality that is susceptible to
perfectionism. Yeah. And connected to that is also, I'm right, please correct me if I'm wrong, is fear of failure? Is that the driver there for these individuals?
Fear of failure becomes a really big thing.
Yeah.
And fear of people knowing about it.
Yeah.
And labelling it as failure in the first point rather than making a mistake or figuring out how to do it the best way or, process of learning. It's this failure. And there's a real aversion to failure because it's taken personally. It means something about me as a person and my worth. That's why it becomes so aversive.
Yeah.
And people become so scared of failure that they will stop trying. And that's where procrastination comes into the picture.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I mean, as I hear you talk, it all kind of makes sense, right, in terms of, you already mentioned procrastination. I'll have some questions for you about that in a minute. But, yeah, that's an obvious example I've experienced myself. Most people have experienced it. But as I understand it, there's a little bit more to procrastination than simply I can't get started because I don't know what to do. So we might return to that question in a minute,
Sure.
but we might move on. So let's go to the next question here. I've got a question asking you about your research and the connection between perfectionism and various mental health conditions. I know you've mentioned some of them already, but I might get you to do a little bit more of a deep dive onto that and maybe explain, some of the relationships and why perfectionism serves as it's like a risk factor for all of these kind of conditions.
We call it a transdiagnostic risk factor because it's relevant to a variety of different diagnostic groups. So certainly eating disorders, depression, anxiety disorders, and suicidality. So these are all of these things become more pronounced when there's perfectionism. And what we think is the key component, if you think about what leads to what, we think that you've got perfectionism, but then the toxic ingredient is that self-criticism. So if people are high in self-criticism, then that starts to lead to depression, to anxiety, to eating disorders, because they start to really, I guess, feel that they're just not worthwhile. And so obviously that can lead to depression, or that sense of everyone knows I'm an imposter leads to anxiety, or the sense of I can't do anything well, but perhaps I can control my weight. So the pathways can differ, but we think that self-criticism is probably the ingredient of perfectionism that is that link, is that bridge to a mental health problem.
And the obvious question I have to ask about that kind of self-criticism, this is a psychological type question, but if as a clinical psychologist, how would you identify someone who has who rates very highly on self-criticism? Is that just something you would do through a questionnaire, like a specific questionnaire, or would that through a couple of sessions? Or I guess I'm trying to understand so anyone's listening right now and then wondering, well, how would I be able to identify whether I'm rate very highly on self-criticism, for instance, if that's a driver?
Yeah. We tend probably not. We have brief questionnaires that might have one item about that, but it's really just in talking to the person. You can ask them, what do they say to themselves when things are not going well? And they say really horrible things, like you're a loser, you're a failure, you're just not good enough, I feel like an imposter. So what's the internal voice saying to you at that time where that really pointy end where you feel you have not met your goal? What's the internal dialogue? What is it saying? And when you hear it, you'll think, oh, that sounds so harsh. And so you get that sense that it's unpleasant. And I remember saying to someone that I was working with or about to work with in the first session, and I said, I'd really like to work with you in therapy. I think, we could really, figure some stuff out. And they said, but what if I fail? What if I can't? And
yet it was therapy.
Yeah. But also when you ask people, are you a perfectionist? Often they'll laugh and they'll say, oh, no, I can't do anything properly. So, it's more in the conversation, I think, that you have with people.
Yeah, sure.
And the way that they talk to themselves. And it should feel a bit harsh.
Yeah, and obviously certain things that they say that are clear signs of something's not quite right there in terms of the dialogue, the narrative that's being that's being provided.
And it's usually things that they would not say to another person in the same situation. So if someone else got a distinction rather than a high distinction, would they say to them, you're such a loser? Oh, no. Well, how come? Because, that's not so bad. Oh, well, how does that not apply to you? Oh, well, I'm different because I need to try harder because I've got less talent. I need to keep pushing myself. And, they see themselves as different.
See, that I'm just thinking from a clinical point of view, how being able to identify that's one thing, but then how to challenge that is a completely different thing. Again, I guess for those who are listening, and there'd be others who'll be interested, like from a clinical psychologist or from a psychologist's point of view, how do you challenge that and make and just say, hang on, let's just challenge some of this a little bit.
I guess a good place to start, we have a bit of a story that we sometimes tell people, and we say, look, imagine you had a child, or you might have a child, but you wanted them to learn tennis. And so you've got a choice of two coaches and you decide to try them both out. The first coach, as your child's learning this new skill, every time they don't get the ball over the net, they call them clumsy. They say, yell at them, they say, you obviously didn't practice this week. This is a waste of my time. You're an idiot. You've got to try harder. Or so you think, oh, okay, let's try the other coach and compare. And the other coach is patient, and when there's mistakes, they say, okay, that wasn't so good, but you can make it better by doing X, Y, and Z. I can see that you're trying. I can see that you're doing your best. And you say to people, which coach would you end up choosing for your child? Now, most people will say, oh, the nicer person, the ones, oh, well, why would you do that? Because I can imagine my child's not going to continue with tennis with the other person. Eventually, they'll become quite upset and they'll decide that they just don't want to do it. And I can see them actually perhaps persisting and getting better with that good feedback from the other person. And we say, then this is what you're talking about. So what about applying that to yourself? And this is why people come to therapy. Oh, no, I'm different. Because I'm so deficient, I need to abuse myself to get to at least do what normal people do.
Yeah.
Okay. So the belief that you've isolated is I'm defective and I need to self-criticize to be productive. Okay. So then it moves really into what we call individual experiments. And so one that we did, you can do it individually, but we've done it with whole classes and I think it's quite fun. We asked the kids to record for a week about their day and what they're doing to be productive in terms of academic. And so most of them, these driven kids, they're not getting enough sleep. They're emailing their teacher at 2 a.m. in the morning. They're being self-critical. They're not doing anything pleasurable because they can't find a reason to do it. They have to work harder and harder and spend more time on study to try and keep up. And so we get them then to rate their productivity over that week. Out of 10, out of 100, what was your productivity? Then we say, okay, for the next week, this is what we want you to do. We want you to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep in regular, go to bed at the same time, have your 8 or 10 hours. We want you to make time each day, up to an hour or 2 hours to do something pleasurable that's got nothing to do with schoolwork. We want you, when you're feeling not good about yourself, to be nice to yourself, to say nice things rather than self-criticize. Do that for a week and spend less time studying. Don't spend any more than, whatever hours. Set a limit on it. Rate your productivity. And what the really nice thing about that is that either people's productivity doesn't change or it gets better. It never gets worse. And so that individual discovery is really the way to start working with people to help them to change, because then the question becomes, well, why go through that unpleasant stuff when it doesn't make you any more productive? And that was the whole point of it. And in fact, for those people who can see they're more productive, okay, you're actually going to get further if you actually take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent example. It's interesting you're saying that with that experiment, performance doesn't decrease. It actually either stays the same or, I dare say, it's likely that the majority would probably increase in terms of productivity.
I think the majority do increase, and I think given time, we only do it for a week, but given a bit more time, they would certainly find that it increases.
Yes, definitely. I can imagine.
And that's what the evidence says. I guess what's been happening over the last 10 or 20 years is evidence has been starting to accrue in the psychological literature, showing that, in fact, self-criticism, apart from making you depressed, anxious, having any sort of socially isolated, it actually makes you less productive, less likely to achieve a valued goal.
Yeah.
Whereas self-compassion, on the other hand, means that you're more likely to reach the valued goal.
There's a lot there to think about. I think it says a lot as well. It's interesting. You're describing some of these students. It's clear to me, and I know Professor Gordon Parker mentioned this, but one population that a lot of people were surprised about is a lot of students do suffer from burnout, and it's amazing because everyone associates burnout obviously with work, right? As in like the workplace, but then of course we have a whole population here that are not even entered the workforce yet, and they're burnt out. It's just, anyway, that's a conversation for another time. But I was surprised when Professor Gordon Parker mentioned that, but then I wasn't surprised. Obviously, being a former secondary school teacher and being around schools my whole life, I'm not surprised one bit. Yeah, and I'm going to come back to, I've got a couple of questions there'll be parents listening in, and so I'll have some kind of, I'll be asking you for some advice for parents who might be listening in around if they think they have a child who might be perfectionistic type traits, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right, let's move on. So my next question relates to your cognitive behavioural model of perfectionism, which is found in your book. So tell us, so those who obviously don't have it in front of them now, could you maybe describe it briefly and just explain to everyone how that was developed? I'm asking this question because I looked at a lot of literature, and your textbook is the only model I found that actually helped me make sense of perfectionism.
Okay.
There is a lot of literature out there, some helpful, some not helpful, but I found the model in particularly very, very useful, and hence why I'm asking you a specific question about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the model starts with this over-evaluation of achievement on how you judge your self-worth. And so that becomes this central driving force. Well, and it might come from basically feeling that you're somehow defective. So you need to, the way forward is to achieve, to show everyone how good you are, and to keep doing it, and to keep achieving higher and higher and higher to show that you're worthwhile. And so that really leads to striving harder and harder. But often that is attended by things like self-criticism. That's, if you think of whipping a horse on a race course, it's the whip, the self-criticism to get you to achieve, to get you over the line. So that's this attendant behaviour or characteristic that people use to get themselves to keep going. And then there's sort of, in this essence, we talk about three different pathways. One is that you might achieve your goal and you think, oh, well, that obviously wasn't ambitious enough. I'll have to set the goal higher and be more ambitious. So that feeds back into this overvaluing achievement in terms of its ability to show your self-worth. They get caught up in this vicious cycle of keep trying to achieve. They might not achieve the goal, and they feel depressed and anxious. And then what young people tell us is that they think, okay, I know how to feel better if I keep working on achievement and if I just try a bit harder. And so it's the old thing of just do the same thing again but do it more. We all get caught up in that if, just try again. And so young people talk about, okay, well, you've just got to try harder, you've got to sleep less, you've got to,
I call it doubling down.
Yeah. You've got to really double down.
Yeah.
So both pathways lead to trying harder to achieve, getting caught in that vicious cycle. The third pathway that we identify is really, oh dear, I haven't done well enough, I'm really not up to this, I'm just going to opt out and I'm going to stop trying. And that's what we see particularly in university students, where they might have got through school okay. They had the supports, but university, as we know, is this sort of unstructured.
It's a very different beast. It's a very different beast, yeah.
And it doesn't matter how many books you read at university. That's not actually what's going to get you through. It's not doing all the work and ticking it, because you can't do all the work. There's too much to read, too much of everything. So
a lot of distractions as well.
A lot of distractions, and that's one of the best or one of the worst times of life, depending on what you do with the distractions. And so those are the people we see drop out, and they end up in jobs they hate, and they see themselves forever as having failed and being a failure.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing I found about the model when I was looking at it is it helped me understand that doubling down. I have to work harder. You know, the old maxim, work smarter, not harder. It's the opposite. It's I work harder, not smarter. And that's the bit that kind of helped explain essentially what goes on. I think, I spent 6 hours studying for this test. Clearly that's not enough. I only got 25 out of 50. That's not good enough.
So now I've got to do 12 hours.
Correct, next.
And I'll have to cut out some sleep.
That's right.
And
so where am I going to get my 12 hours
friends.
from? Yeah.
Yeah. So life starts to narrow down because it all becomes about achievement. You haven't got time to do anything else.
I mean, which to me makes complete sense here in terms of if you're caught in that, that's very difficult to see.
Well, we call it a vicious cycle because it's like swirling around down the bath plug hole. You know, it's sort of like you get caught up in the momentum and it's human nature to think, look, I'll just try harder. It'll work next time. Yeah. And so you see that again and again in this group.
You see, because my logical question is, when are you going to hit rock bottom? Because it's simply not enough as, I'm going to give up, because that still doesn't stop.
No, that leaves a terrible wound.
Correct,
the people that I see that left medical school 6 years ago and they're working for the public service, nothing wrong with working for the public service, but this is not what they wanted and they're doing a desk job. And their disappointment and their grief is there every day. And they haven't, their life really is not a life worth living. And it's not about getting them back to medical school or law school or wherever it is. It's about them starting to get back in touch with who they are, what they like, what makes them special as a person. It's not just achievement. But they're mourning this thing that they lost, and it can blight your whole life if you're allowed that to. Yeah.
Because I guess the logical question to ask is, what's rock bottom? Like, so when, as a clinical psychologist, when do you tend to see patients who come in so-called rock bottom? Whatever rock bottom means, but what's rock bottom here?
Looks different for different people, but they come in because either they've become so depressed that they've stopped being able to concentrate. So, they've got this, I can't even do my schoolwork anymore. Or they've had to pull back. And I'm thinking of one student that came to see me. She'd started university. She was attending lectures and tutorials, but she was too frightened to ask questions in case people thought she was stupid. And so she stopped going to tutorials because she felt like she was showing up as not being as good as the others. She stopped handing in work because her assignments, because she would do them, but then she'd say, they're not good enough. So she would stop handing them in. And eventually, so she would fail. And after about 2 or 3 years of that, the university wrote her a letter and they said, look, you've just been failing every year. Can you give us just cause why we should let you keep studying? It might be time for you to leave the degree because you're, clearly not getting through the degree. But if you can write us a letter to explain to us if there's a reason for this, we're very happy to take that on board. Oh, dear. She has to write a letter that explains perfectly what's been going on. She couldn't do it. She didn't write the letter. So she got sort of removed from the university. That's when she came to see me. That was her rock bottom.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
And I said, oh, okay, well, how about we write the letter? How about you write a sentence over the next week that we can put into a letter? And we don't have to explain perfectly. We just have to give them a bit of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And she came back that next week with a 1.5-page letter that she'd written and made a few suggestions about clearer expression, didn't really change it. She sent it in. And they said, oh, okay, we've got it now. Come back in, start study, but you obviously need help. So rock bottom is usually when people can see their goals have slipped away altogether or are in danger of slipping away because the perfectionism by its nature has stopped them from achieving.
Yeah. My next question, let's turn to intervention/therapeutic type approaches. And what are the most effective approaches for helping people manage their perfectionism?
So I'm very much an evidence wonk, and most of the evidence is for a cognitive behavioural approach. People have done 1 or 2 evaluations of other interventions, psychoanalytic, done in a group, where people are more likely to reflect on their upbringing in terms of how it's influenced them. Mindfulness is another approach that has been examined, and I guess also acceptance and commitment therapy type of work. But essentially, CBT has had lots of robust randomised trials, and it shows very consistent good outcome across not just perfectionism, but depression, anxiety, eating, and self-esteem.
Sure. And for those who are not listening and are not aware what CBT is, that's cognitive behavioural therapy. Maybe just in a quick nutshell, explain what that is.
Yeah, so the essence of cognitive behavioural therapy is that if it comes with a model, so an event will occur, but it means different things to different people. So people interpret it differently. So if you were about to yawn, I might think, oh, no, I'm being boring.
I promise you're not.
Or I might interpret it and think, oh, poor guy, he obviously didn't get enough sleep last night. That might be my clinical psychology caring hat. I might interpret it as a sign of rudeness. So I might be offended and get angry. So if I have the first interpretation and I think that I'm being boring, then I'm going to get anxious and I'm going to start to make mistakes. So it will affect my mood. I'll get anxious, and then that affects my behaviour. I'll start to make mistakes, perhaps start to talk too rapidly. If I believe, oh, poor guy, he didn't get enough sleep last night, and so I'm just sort of being compassionate, I'll just keep rolling along. It won't make much difference. I won't feel alarmed. I'll just perhaps feel a little bit more compassion towards you and just keep an eye out for you. That might be the behaviour. If I start to think, oh, he's so rude, then I will get angry. And when we're angry, we know that we start to behave in different ways. We start to sometimes refuse to talk or give briefer answers or start to get a bit aggressive in our responses. So it's the same event, but what cognitive behaviour therapy is interested in is how people interpret that event and then how it affects emotion, which then affects how we behave differently.
Okay. Thank you for answering that, because there'll be a lot of people who'll be listening in and go, oh, CBT, what's CBT? And your explanation also helps understand why it's effective in combating, well, not combating, it's probably not the right term, but as a therapeutic, if you like, as an intervention type strategy. Just again, for those who are listening, as the CBT interventions, sorry, what were the I think you listed 3 or 4. What were the ones that you found from research to be quite successful? I've got here meditation.
It was mindfulness.
Mindfulness, sorry, my fault. Mindfulness.
Psychoanalytic sort of approach, where you look more at your upbringing. And ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, which is very similar to CBT, but it talks about distancing yourself, not aligning yourself with the event, stepping back and not taking things personally and diffusing and that type of approach.
Okay. No, that's quite useful. Mindfulness means many things to many different people today. What do you mean by mindfulness?
In this case, the mindfulness, I think they, again, did it as a group, so it's skills training, and it's about observing events, but again, stepping back, observing them, and understanding that feelings come and go, that no one feeling is more valid than another, and therefore you might feel upset one day but feel happier the next. But it's again the stepping back and trying to see the bigger picture rather than get caught up in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, look, there's so many different approaches to mindfulness and meditation. Normally they go together, but they're not the same thing. So, and a lot of people are kind of obviously promoting and advocating for, certain ones over other.
People advocate for all sorts of things, and that's their right. But what I look for is the evidence. And unfortunately, somehow we've got into a situation where often the people that have something to promote without evidence, that they just tend to be better. They've got the shiny thing, and they can say anything about it. They can say, this has helped lots of people, da-da-da. The scientific dorks like me say, well, this has all the evidence, and then we try and explain it, and everyone's lost consciousness by that time and they've lost interest. But often it's the things that don't have evidence, which are easy to put together because you don't have to keep testing them and modifying them. So it's a bit of a problem when the marketplace is so much out there, but you really need to look for the evidence.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you are right. There's promoting for the sake of selling, say, a product, and then there are those who are trying to help individuals, and it's a long list of, and there's a long list of, what people consider to be mindfulness and meditation and so on and so forth. It's a bit of a minefield, actually.
Yeah, and it is really tricky for people when they're trying to find out the best way to get help.
That's right.
It's almost, unless you have a relative who happens to be a psychologist, it's almost impossible to find your way through it.
Yeah, agreed. You've explained pretty much the others as well, so we won't kind of touch on those again. But I guess people. Let's go now to the question of procrastination.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the relationship between perfectionism and procrastination. So, maybe start with that relationship. Talk a little bit more about procrastination, what it is, how you can overcome it, and why it's one of the bigger ones of the what's the word I'm looking for? Why it's one of the bigger known symptoms of perfectionism.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of people listening to this who suffer from procrastination from time to time. Even I have, but I understand there are different types as well. So
everything's on a bit of a continuum. Yeah. And I guess the thing about procrastination is when a student drops out of university, for example, people think, oh, well, they weren't very good. They never handed in things. They don't see them as a perfectionist. But in fact, that might be the reason that they weren't handing in the work. So it can masquerade in different ways and people interpret it differently. But the link is when you're a perfectionist, you think you put so much pressure on yourself to achieve not just the high standard, but a rigidly high standard. So unless I get straight A's, then I am no good. Okay, that might be that very rigid rule that you're aiming for. Or if you're a footballer, I'm not into football, but you might you might say, I have to get at least 3 goals in every match, or I have to not be injured, or whatever the goal is. And for some people, well, we would say that perfectionists set goals that are destined for failure because we can't achieve these very rigid things all the time. It's just not possible because life intervenes.
Yeah.
And we have to take into account the outside forces, which also mean that we don't always meet our goals. And some people find that so aversive that what happens is the procrastination is driven by I will do this task when I feel I can do it right to my standards. And what they seem to envisage, imagine you're writing an essay, that I will sit down at the laptop and I will just sit there for 2 hours and write out the final product.
I wish I could do that.
Yes, yes. But that's the pressure they're putting on themselves. Yeah. That's what they think high achievers do. When really, for me, I write a few sentences and then I might have a paragraph and then I'm moving them around and, adding. But basically it's this pressure to get it right the first time. And so people sit down, and there's a wonderful YouTube video, cartoon video on this, where a guy sits down, he's got his assignment to do for the day, sits down at the desk and thinks, he feels doesn't feel quite right, not quite up to producing the perfect product, so he'll go and wash the dishes. And then he comes back to the desk and looks at it and thinks, I might feel more like I can do it if I sharpen my pencils. And then comes back to it and thinks, I'm still not quite in the middle. I don't think I can pump out that perfect product. I'll do the food shopping today. And comes back and thinks, I might as well cook something while I'm here. It goes on and on and on. But it's all driven by, I sit down and I just don't quite feel I'm ready to produce that perfect product. So I won't do anything. I'll go away and do something else.
And so what advice would you give to someone who, say, is suffering from procrastination?
Well, we sometimes resort to the old, I think it was the Nike sort of saying of just do it. But by just do it, we mean just write a sentence, but put something there. So I know postgraduates have found this very useful, doing a thesis and they all get overcome and they sit looking at a blank screen. It's like, well, just write down one sentence and walk away for 10 minutes and then come back. Then walk away, then come back. Have timed breaks. Don't sit for more than 15 minutes in front of your computer and give yourself that 5-minute break, which is when, for me certainly, I know it's when I'm driving home, I start to get these thoughts. It's when I'm not trying. And if you just sit there trying for all day looking at this blank screen, it actually gets worse.
Yeah.
And so we get people just write something, and it can be really substandard with lots of spelling mistakes, but just get started. What's one idea you want to put into writing today? But don't put yourself under pressure. And what people find is once they've taken that pressure off, they actually write more than they had intended. And they start to put things together, and it starts to come together. But you have to take the pressure off to get things done, to get it out right, and to just sit down in one sitting to do it. And this is why people often get to the night before an assignment's due. They haven't put anything to paper. They've thought about it a lot. How am I going to write it? But it's like, no. You should have just been writing bits and pieces and bringing it together. So they sit down the night before the assignment and they write out something. And of course, probably they don't do as well because it's all been in one sitting when they're tired and they're anxious, and it's not going to be their best work.
Yes, agreed. Unfortunately, over the years, I've seen a lot of that. You get a mixture of, that's when I work my best, Tracey, under pressure, the night before. I've tried all sorts of different things, but it's the only way I can do it, I need to do it the night before. I need that time pressure. What do you say to those students or people who think like that?
We again would turn it into a bit of an experiment. Like, okay, well, maybe that's true. Maybe you're the person that needs the time pressure. How about we try 2 different ways with your assignments? With one assignment, do 2 hours each day, no more, for 14 days leading into the assignment. With the other one, do your normal thing. And then tell me how that works for you. Let's rate it in terms of how good you thought it was, what sort of mark it got, how much you enjoyed the experience. Because that's important too. If you're not enjoying achievement, and perfectionists stop enjoying it, if you're not enjoying it, then it doesn't become something that is very pleasant for you. And We also do a bit of psychoeducation around this. We talk about the thing that we all learn about in psychology, the Yerkes-Dodson law, which shows the relationship between effort and output or performance. So if you imagine a graph and you've got performance, you've got that going up your axis, and then on your horizontal axis you've got the effort. So people think the more effort they put into a task, that performance just gets better and better. So the more effort, the better the performance is what they think. The Yerkes-Dodson rule has shown that it's an inverted U, that more effort pays off for a while, but it hits a peak beyond which performance deteriorates.
Yeah.
And that's what we call burnout, or that's when you're sitting for 3 hours at your computer thinking, I can't take a break, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to get it all done tonight. Your performance is actually starting to deteriorate.
Yeah.
And because you're tired, because, you need that sort of step back, bit of thinking about something else before you can dive back into it.
Yeah.
So a bit of psychoeducation and getting them to experiment with different ways and actually start to think, is this really the best way for me?
Thank you for answering that, because I will use that myself, because I get that a lot from some of my students that, that's the only way Steve and I can work. And of course I try and explain to them how performance-wise it might not necessarily equate to some of your best work. And it's interesting how it would then tie back into your model, because here you have a model of success. Well, that's how I've always done it, Tracey or Stephen. So why would I change it? So it's I could just see how hard that is to challenge. Because if that's all that's given me success, why would I change that?
Well, particularly for a bit harm avoidant, you don't want to try new ways. You're anxious.
Why would I change it?
And it may have changed. It might have worked for them in school.
Yeah.
They handed out a good enough product compared to the rest of their peers, which was pretty good. University, there's more competition, but also we're not looking for the person that's answered the question right. We're looking for people who think and people who can reassemble ideas in an original way. And so when we get out this, I sat up last night and wrote this, you think, yeah, but that's not really doing it for me. No, inevitably it does come down to, well, yes, I can tell that you wrote it in a couple of hours. Anyway, let's not worry about what I think here. Now, the obvious question, it's not an obvious question, but there'll be a lot of people who'll be wondering, so how does perfectionism manifest differently across the various stages of life here, lifespan here? So is it, for instance, a question might be, is it, for instance, going to be female teenagers? Is it going to, so how does it manifest across the lifespan, I guess is the question here. So you can certainly see it, as I said, in children with the anxious kids who want to follow the rules. We think it's probably evenly divided between males and females. So it might be slightly higher in females. We don't have good statistics. It really depends on what measure of perfectionism you use, but there's not a huge gender disparity.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, the studies that have come out of Scandinavia, where they tend to be able to do more these big studies where everyone answers questionnaires when you ask them to, they show that kids of a lower SES are as perfectionistic as kids of a higher SES, socioeconomic status.
Yes.
And which, again, surprises people. They think, but I would only think, these kids from affluent families who are at private schools are the ones. And that's not the case. It's really about this sense of wanting to do things right and to prove that you're at least as good as everyone by showing that you can do things to the right way. And because it's across the domains of life, we're not just talking about academic work either. So there doesn't seem to be this divide between being affluent or not. So that, and a lot of people just believe that must be the case, but it's not.
I can imagine it would, if it was going to show, it would be when you're starting to be at school, for instance, when you're starting to do work.
Yes.
So I can imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, that if it's ever going to start showing, it would start primary school and then secondary school.
I think particularly as soon as kids hit school, because school has to have lots of rules. You can't run down the corridor. You have to wear your hats on at lunchtime so you don't get sunburnt. You have to treat everyone with respect. This is the first time I think.
Certain uniform.
Yeah.
If you have a uniform, most schools do today.
Yeah. So this is really the first time kids get this barrage of rules. Before at home, I mean, there are, they know that there are expectations, but it's not set down as this whole list of rules. And at school, it's never ending. Sometimes you find out the rule once you've broken it. But no, you can't ride your bike in the schoolyard. Oh, no one ever told me. Well, that's the rule. So I think school starts to become more noticeable there because there's so many rules to follow that you can break. Rules are there to be broken, guidelines can be bended. But at schools are just based around rules. And so the kids who are susceptible to that, who worry about that, this is when they start to think, oh, I know how to become acceptable. I know how the teacher will like me. It's by being the rule follower, but not just following the rules, but doing it better than everyone else.
Yeah. Okay, see, that's interesting because then it was interesting hearing you talk about secondary school. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong here. If it's ever going to manifest in a very negative way, am I right in thinking it's going to be secondary school because you're getting more assessment and you're getting more deadlines?
Yeah.
There's more expected of you.
Yeah, the academic pressure, but also if you're an athlete, anything that you're involved in a competitive way, it starts to become much more, I guess, life-defining.
Yeah.
Are you actually going to get into university? Are you going to get into the swim squad? Are you going to get into the classical ballet sort of training school? This is when decisions start to get made about people's pathways. So that pressure is there much more.
Yeah.
And so that becomes really quite intolerable for perfectionists because they're trying to keep up, trying to do their best. But this is when, as I said before, they can start to take their foot off the pedal because it's all too much.
It's all too much. It's overwhelming and it just gets too much. I can I definitely can see how that's one kind of branch of your model, definitely. Oh, it's just all too much. I can't do it anymore, Tracey. Yeah. I got to ask a question here is because here's me thinking, it's probably an urban myth more than anything. Here's me thinking that it was just female teenage girls that just suffer from perfectionism. But I'm wrong.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Now, why would I believe that? Where would that urban myth come from? Where would I be getting that idea from? By the way, I knew it was wrong, but I just being a bit cheeky here.
Yeah, I think perfectionism gets conflated a lot with eating disorders. So we know that more girls have eating disorders, but we see a lot of boys with perfectionism, and it more tells in their schoolwork that they're doing very well, but they are exhausted and depressed and suicidal.
Wow.
And we know that suicide is the major cause of death for people aged between 18 and 25. And that's the risky period, particularly for the boys, where they feel that they just can't keep the effort. So they may commit suicide and people don't ever really know about the perfectionism. They don't know what was going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
They might call it depression.
Wow, I did not know that because obviously recently with all the media, everyone's talking about middle-aged men, in 40s, mid-40s through to early 50s. It doesn't surprise me, but at the same time, it's I don't know why I had this feeling that it was not a feeling. I don't know why. I agree. It probably came from that because I automatically knew that females obviously suffer more from eating disorders, and therefore, knowing about my link between perfectionism and eating disorders, I just automatically assumed, which of course is the wrong thing to do here.
But I wonder also if people see that girls are more likely to be rule followers. There is that socialization where we perceive boys as more likely not to follow the rules and acting out, but that doesn't mean they're not perfectionistic.
Yeah, okay.
And some of that acting out might actually be driven by feeling not good enough.
Okay.
And feeling that if they can't be good enough, then they're just going to be a real nuisance to people.
Oh, okay, I see.
So it might be the distress may be expressed in different ways, I think.
Okay. Wow. You see, it's also, again, obviously, again, please correct me if I'm wrong here, when it comes to suicide, males are more successful in terms of the lethality of the selection versus girls opt for different modes.
Yeah, they choose more violent modes, which can, lead to the outcome that they desire. So that can be, and they're also doing things which are inherently more risky, and it's easy if you're driving fast down a country road, easy to become impulsive and think, I'm just going to, twist the wheel.
Yeah. Wow. All right, let's move on. My next question, and you have touched on it, and it's a nice little segue, but why are we now seeing rising rates of perfectionism around young people? I know you touched on it kind of briefly, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail around why we're seeing this now more than any other time.
Yeah, I think we don't know exactly why, so we're sort of making this up. We do think that social media has somewhat changed the way that people judge themselves. So one of the things that we do know is that imagery-based communication is much more powerful in terms of impacting emotion than talking. So that's why trauma gets encapsulated in images. It's not sentence-based. And social media, of course, is all based around imagery. Yep. And that perfect moment, that perfect look, the right pose, the other thing that it has, which is really addictive to the brain, is the gamification, which is the reward, the numbers. I have 25 followers and you only have 10. So it's all very easy to see who's more popular, who's getting more hits, and how many followers people have. So it's this idea, it becomes this competition of who actually is more popular by social media standards. The other thing, of course, which happens is it becomes much easier to bully people on social media and to start to be critical of them, and they start to internalize that and think, I am defective, and if they're a bit of a perfectionist, that, they feel that everyone knows that they're a fraud or that they are defective, and that's very difficult for them to live with.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation? What do you think of that work?
Yeah, so I think Jonathan Haidt's book is really talking about a correlation, but it's a fairly convincing correlation, looking at the fact that the onset of making social media much more accessible to kids via phones is when we start to see a big increase in adolescent depression and mental health problems. Yeah. So you can't, of course, talk about causation through correlation, but we have actually done some studies. We've looked at longitudinal studies when it comes to body dissatisfaction, and we have found that there is a causal pathway from social media use to worse body satisfaction.
Right.
We've also just done this in a study that we had last year with 1,500 kids. Greater use of social media at the beginning led to a higher desire to self-harm at the follow-up period.
Wow.
So the longitudinal studies are starting to emerge. We don't have a lot of strong ones, and some of them will tell you different things, but there's something happening there that, there is something. And, of course, social media can be good, can be bad. It's really about social media curation.
Yes.
Being really careful which platforms you're being exposed to, how you use it, how long you use it for.
And would you put an age restriction on usage, like as in personal devices like phones?
Yeah, I have been supportive of that. I've got a colleague, Dr. Simon Wilkes, who's very supportive of that, and he's been driving the changes and working in South Australia for that. And, I guess it's like smoking. We say, well, you shouldn't have cigarettes before you're 18.
That's right.
No, we can't stop children smoking when they're 12. They still will smoke if they're going to. But having that law makes it a little bit more difficult. But it also gets everyone on the same sort of headset of, okay, there's something wrong about smoking. I might not understand why, but I know it's decided that it's bad. So I, as a parent, will work with that rather than giving my child cigarettes when they're 12.
Yeah. What about a health warning? Just like there are health warnings on a pack of cigarettes, should we have a health warning on, say, smartphones?
That becomes a little bit more complex because as far as I understand about smoking, it's always harmful. Yeah. There's never a good outcome from smoking. With the use of the phone, there are some good outcomes. You know, you are more connected with peers, parents.
Yes.
And we all, if you're my age, you think back to, well, what did I do without a phone? You know, like when the car broke down and I couldn't call my husband to come out and change the tyre. Like, really, what did I used to do? So there's those good things, but there's the bad things. So this is why I think unfortunately it's another burden for parents, but to really work with their child, to understand what platforms they're using, to discuss as a family what's on and what's not on, and to set some limits around just, you can't sit in front of a screen all day. It's not good for your physical health or your mental health. We have to get out there as a family and enjoy the great outdoors.
Yeah. And to be fair, a lot of platforms have age restrictions. You know, you have to be a certain age and so on and so forth. And whether they police those properly or enforce them, that's another conversation for another time. Yeah. But I want to go, there'll be parents listening in here right now. What would you say to parents who have children or a child who are perfectionistic or have perfectionistic traits? What would you say to them?
I would say start to act now. Don't just wait to see what would happen. So what work we've just written up and submitted for publication is work with 7 to 12-year-old kids, but we got the parents to train up in CBT and we got the parents to deliver it to their child. And so we got them to do fun activities together along the lines we've been talking about, that more effort is not better, understanding it's okay to achieve but not to have rigid goals. And so the whole family learned together about these things. It's just 6 lessons, and they have a guide. The parents can talk to a guide to help them with that. And so what we found was that the parents' perfectionism decreased. The kids' perfectionism didn't decrease, but what improved was their academic engagement. Their depression dropped, their concern over their weight dropped. Okay. And so there are a lot of benefits in terms of this broader life satisfaction. And so I think that shows it's never too early to intervene. Okay. And to start thinking about that different pathway to achievement that doesn't harm the child. It's okay to say, don't work on it for more than 3 hours. Just let's have a balanced life. Yeah. And let's just be careful how we talk to each other. Let's not talk about failure, success. Let's talk about the journey and trying and the adventure of finding out. Yeah. So, you know, it just means being a bit more thoughtful. Sure. And I think as a parent, if you've got concerns, because these were kids whose parents thought perfectionism in their child was starting to harm their child, I think if you're at that point, I would certainly invest in a few sessions with a psychologist. Yeah, okay. And not because they have any disorder or that it's turned into a major problem yet, but to start for the child to think about different ways of approaching achievement.
Yeah. Now, you said something before, and it was more a clarificatory kind of point for me, but you said something about the parents' levels of perfectionism decrease. Yeah. So you were saying that, are you alleging or saying that their parents' perfectionism is related to the child's perfectionism? Is that what you kind of saying there, or have I got that wrong?
No, you have repeated back to me exactly what I said.
Okay, yeah.
And we are puzzling over that finding because these parents were all caring parents, wanting the best for the child. They brought their child into the study because they could see that perfectionism was damaging. Yes. But obviously these traits that arise in families are correlated. So if you've got a perfectionistic kid, you've probably got a slightly perfectionistic adult
Yes.
in the family as well.
Yes, that makes sense.
And it's not that the parent is trying, these parents were trying to help their child be less perfectionistic.
Yeah, okay.
But what the intervention did was give the parents a chance to reflect on what we were saying, apply it to themselves, as well as then discuss it with their child.
Yeah.
So it was a really nice byproduct that their perfectionism decreased.
Wow.
And then that led to all these advantages. The child seemed to relax and seemed to enjoy things a bit more.
Yeah.
The pressure was off. So I'm really being careful here not to blame the parents, because I don't think they are to blame. I just think that perfectionistic kids come from perfectionistic adults, and they can see what they don't want for their children. But often it means everyone just relaxing and having a bit of fun with it.
Yes.
And allowing those changes to take place.
Yes. Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. Like when you said it, I just automatically registered. I've gone, whoa, hang on. As a father myself with kids, young kids, teenage kids, I guess that question is more for me than any other parent who's listening in right now. So I'm not surprised that parents who might have perfectionistic traits would have some impact on that potential, kind of perfectionism in their children in some form or another. And it's interesting they identify it and say, hang on, no, I actually don't want that. This is why I'm actually coming here to do the CBT training and everything, because I know it hasn't worked for me, so therefore we need to intervene here quickly.
Exactly. They can see it hasn't worked for them. They don't want it for their child, but they're probably not quite aware of how different things influence their child.
Yeah.
We all, most of us are not that aware of how we influence others. We just sort of are in our own bubble and getting along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's full credit to those parents who can identify it in themselves and say, look, let's intervene early.
It shows a lot of love for the kids because, it did take 2 to 3 hours a week of, doing this work.
Yeah.
And in busy families, that's a big impost.
Yes.
And, of course, we ask them to fill out questionnaires so we can see what's happening.
Yes.
And so, that's a lot of effort for families.
Yeah.
So they're doing exactly the right thing, and they're being open to learning new ways.
Yes. All right, Mike, we're on the home stretch. So for any listeners struggling with perfectionism, what practical strategies would you recommend for them in terms of developing maybe a healthy relationship with, say, achievement and self-evaluation? Or what advice would you, I guess, give anyone who's kind of, say, struggling with their own perfectionism?
Yeah. I mean, obviously conflict of interest, but I would say getting the self-help book is a good start. Most people do actually, when they read it, they do find it helpful.
Well, I'd recommend it. So that's no conflict of interest. So I'd recommend it. Yes.
Yeah. So we do have this website called overcomingperfectionism.com, and it does have resources on there that are freely available because we're committed to that. It does have some resources from the book, but it also has, I would say, a couple of very good online interventions which are free. There are 8 modules. We've got one for teenagers, we've got one for adults, and we've evaluated them in randomized trials. And so you can just use our programs on the internet for free, and you don't have to do all the modules, but even just starting the first one and starting to think about what is perfectionism versus achieving excellence. Just thinking, is this me? Does this fit? Do I need to do a bit more work on this? Is doing it online or by myself the best way? Should I go and talk to someone, talk to a professional? And we're just talking about a few sessions to help people start to break down unhelpful patterns and build up some alternative but helpful ways of functioning and see if that suits them better. So I would advise, it's very hard, we talked about the vicious cycle. It is actually quite hard to break out on your own. People can do it, but sometimes just trying on your own and using those resources is not quite enough.
Sure.
You actually do need to go to someone and get a bit of extra support and a bit of help.
Yeah, makes sense. For those who are listening, just tell everyone about your book here. I've got it in front of me. Again, I'll read it for those who don't know what I'm holding in front of me, and you might have missed it. But so we've got Overcoming Perfectionism. I have the second edition in front of me, and the subtitle is A Self-Help Guide Using Scientifically Supported Cognitive Behavioural Techniques, and that's with Roz Saffron. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Saffron.
And Sarah Egan. And, of course, I've got the pleasure with me to have Tracey Wade with me right now. Do you want to just tell our listeners who might be listening a little bit about the book and so on and so forth, so they are aware of it?
Yeah, so the book is certainly accessible online. You can order it in. It's part of a series. It's a UK series that they have overcoming depression, overcoming anxiety, overcoming low self-esteem. There's a book for every problem. So generally it's a good series, and it's designed for self-help to do without a professional. So that would, that most people find that just even the book is divided into two parts. So just reading the first part can be helpful, which is explaining what perfectionism is, giving case studies, and people start to think, oh, that's me. I didn't know that other people had this problem.
Yes.
And then the second half, which is the biggest part of the book, is techniques and things to do.
Yeah, a lot of practical type things that you can do.
A lot of practical and application to, again, case studies.
Yeah.
There is, I should say, a completely free resource through the Centre of Clinical Interventions, which is a Perth-based organisation. It's a government organisation. They also have online PDF modules of CBT for perfectionism.
Oh, okay.
So people could also look to that. And that's a resource that we should be very proud of as Australians. The whole world is sort of aware of the work they do, and they put out stuff for all sorts of mental health problems.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That's great. We also have our website, overcomingperfectionism.com, that has a lot of our resources on that, and it also has portals to free online modules which you can do and work through. And we know that doing those modules significantly decreases people's perfectionism and improves their mental health.
Okay. And the last question really I have for you is, so just for those who are listening in and just wondering what is next for you, but just maybe you can tell us a little bit about any upcoming or potential research projects you might have on perfectionism that you're currently engaged in now, or upcoming, or anything that you think, that might be relevant here.
Yeah, I think I keep thinking that each research project is my last, but I did find myself currently thinking we really enjoyed doing work with children and getting the parents to deliver the cognitive behaviour therapy. And part of the reason we enjoyed that is because we know that it's sort of never too early to intervene. And the earlier you can get in, probably the better. So we would actually like to extend that. And the kids were complaining it was a bit too much like homework at times. So we want to make it even more fun and have a bit of a workbook for kids, but one that's a little just more fun.
Yes.
So to get them even more involved, because we were very impressed with the benefits the kids got from our pilot trial. So we'd really like to build that up and, again, get that stuff out there so people can use it.
Yes, I see. And really the last question I'll ask you is, do you think we've missed anything that we should talk about in relation to perfectionism?
No, I think you've done a very good coverage. I think you've done perfect coverage of the topic. And I think that it gives people a good idea perhaps where to head to, what to look at, and there's enough materials they can start to look at and think about whether it applies to them. Yeah,
sure. Well, on that point, we might leave it there. I want to say thank you, Professor Tracey Wade, for joining me today. I really appreciate you accepting my invitation, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for all the valuable work you're doing.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stoltz. What a privilege it's been to explore the paradox of perfectionism with Professor Tracey Wade, a scholar whose work reveals how our greatest strength can become our most cunning saboteur. Today we peer behind the curtain of the perfectionistic mind, where the applause never quite drowns out the inner critic and where good enough feels like surrender rather than wisdom. Professor Wade has shown us something fascinating. Perfectionism isn't just about doing things flawlessly, it's about believing our worth hangs in the balance every outcome. Here's a question to carry with you. What if the very thing you've been told makes you special, your relentless standards, your attention to detail, your refusal to settle, might also be the prison you've unknowingly built around your own happiness. As Professor Wade reminds us, the goal isn't to become mediocre, it's to become human. And humanity, with all its beautiful flaws, might just be the most perfect thing of all. This has been Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stoltz. Until next time, dare to be brilliantly imperfect, stay curious, and think deeply.